Instructor Zorak Peel's antennae twitched with irritation as he scrolled through the roster for the upcoming Wilderness Survival Assessment. The new regulations from the Galactic Alliance Council had finally come into effect. And there it was, the first human cadet enrolled in the program. He clicked on the profile, and the holographic display expanded to reveal detailed information about Cadet Mara Thompson. "A Deathworlder," he muttered under his breath, mandibles clicking in a rhythm that signaled deep concern. How in the seven spiral arms did they expect a fragile species to survive our training? The question wasn't rhetorical. Humans came from what the Alliance classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, Earth, a planet so hazardous by galactic standards that most species considered it uninhabitable. High gravity, extreme temperature variations, aggressive predators, and microscopic pathogens that could devour you from the inside out. The classification wasn't an exaggeration, it was a warning. Yet, here they were, accepting humans into the Academy's elite wilderness survival program. Politics, Peel thought bitterly. Always politics. A soft chime interrupted his brooding. His colleague Graz had sent a message. "Heard about your new assignment, the human cadet. Fascinating opportunity, don't you think?" Peel didn't share Graz's enthusiasm. Fascinating wasn't the word he would choose. Problematic, perhaps. Or potentially disastrous. "Commander Vox wants to see you," came another notification, this one marked urgent. Peel straightened his uniform and made his way to the commander's office, his four legs moving with practiced precision across the Academy's polished floors. The corridors were filled with cadets from across the galaxy, tall, willowy Atraxians with their multifaceted eyes, bulky Gorlanians whose scaled skin glinted under the artificial lighting, translucent Marexi who seemed to shimmer as they passed. But no humans. Not yet, anyway. Commander Vox was waiting, her tentacles arranged in a formal pattern that indicated this was an official assignment rather than a casual conversation. "Instructor Peel," she began, her voice modulator adjusting to a frequency that Peel's species found most comfortable. "I assume you've reviewed the roster for the wilderness assessment?" "Yes, Commander. I noticed we have our first human participant." "Indeed. Cadet Mara Thompson. The Council is particularly interested in the outcome of this assessment. As you know, humans have been petitioning for full Alliance membership for decades. This is a significant step in evaluating their capabilities." Peel's inner eyelid flickered, a sign of skepticism in his species. "With all due respect, Commander, I'm concerned about the safety protocols. Humans are fragile. Their exoskeletons are internal. Their skin offers minimal protection, and they lack natural defensive capabilities." "Your concerns are noted, Instructor," Vox replied, her tentacles shifting slightly. "That's precisely why you've been assigned as the primary observer for this assessment. Your experience and judgment are unparalleled. The assessment will take place on Epsilon 7, as planned for all cadets. Standard protocols apply." "Epsilon 7? Peel couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. "Commander, that moon has predatory species that would consider a human nothing more than a convenient meal. Which is why we have observation protocols in place. You will monitor from a safe distance. Intervention is authorized only in cases of imminent fatality. The Council wants an authentic assessment, not a ceremonial one." Peel's antennae drooped slightly, but he straightened them immediately. "Understood, Commander. I'll prepare the necessary equipment." "One more thing, Instructor," Vox added, her voice modulator shifting to a lower tone. "Approach this assignment with an open mind. The Council believes humans may have unexpected qualities that our traditional metrics might not fully capture." Peel left the commander's office with a sense of unease settling in his thoracic cavity. He had 3 rotation cycles to prepare for the assessment. 3 cycles to figure out how to observe a human cadet's almost certain failure without intervening too soon or too late. The journey to Epsilon 7 was uneventful. Peel spent most of the transit time reviewing Thompson's academic records. They were impressive, he had to admit. Top marks in theoretical survival strategies, excellent performance in simulated environments, and a particular aptitude for adaptive problem-solving. But theory and practice were different matters entirely, especially on a moon like Epsilon 7. When they arrived at the orbital station above the moon, Peel called for an orientation briefing. The cadets, 23 in total, representing 17 different species, assembled in the station's main conference room. Thompson was easy to spot, the only one with an internal skeleton, pinkish-brown external covering, and that peculiar growth of protein filaments on the top of her head that humans called hair. "Cadets," Peel began, his translator unit ensuring all present could understand. "Welcome to your wilderness survival assessment. The parameters are simple. 5 rotation cycles on the surface of Epsilon 7. Your objective is to establish a functional camp, secure food and water sources, and defend yourselves against the local fauna." He activated the holographic display, showing a detailed map of the designated landing zones. "Each of you will be deployed to a separate region with minimal equipment. Communication devices are for emergency extraction only. Success is measured not just by survival, but by the methods and adaptations you demonstrate." Peel's gaze lingered on Thompson. The human stood straight, attentive, showing no outward signs of anxiety despite being surrounded by species with natural advantages she lacked. "Interesting. Questions?" Peel asked. A Gorlanian's raised a scaled appendage. "Instructor, what is the threat assessment for predatory species in our zones?" "Variable," Peel replied. "Each zone has been selected to present comparable challenges, though the specific predators differ. You have all studied the fauna database. Apply that knowledge accordingly." Another question came from a hovering Marexi. "Are we permitted to establish alliances with native species?" "If you can manage such a feat, it will be noted in your assessment," Peel answered. "However, remember that most native species view off-worlders as potential threats or food sources." Thompson raised her hand, the gesture strangely delicate compared to the appendages of her classmates. "Instructor, are there any specific regulations regarding tool creation from available materials?" The question caught Peel's attention. "No regulations beyond the ethical treatment of sentient species. Innovation is encouraged, Cadet Thompson." A subtle smile appeared on the human's face, a facial expression that Peel had studied but still found difficult to interpret accurately. Was it confidence? Amusement? Determination? Human micro-expressions were notoriously complex. "Deployment begins in 6 standard hours," Peel concluded. "Prepare yourselves accordingly." As the cadets dispersed, Peel noticed Thompson lingering, studying the holographic map with intense focus, particularly the topographical features of her assigned zone. She seemed to be memorizing every detail: the water sources, elevation changes, dense vegetation areas. Most cadets relied on their issued devices for such information, but Thompson was committing it to memory. Deployment day arrived with the efficiency that characterized all Academy operations. One by one, the cadets were transported to their designated zones on Epsilon 7's surface. Thompson was the last to go, stepping onto the transport pad with a determined expression. "Good luck, Cadet," Peel said, more out of protocol than genuine sentiment. Thompson's response surprised him. "Luck is just probability taken personally, Instructor," she said with that same enigmatic smile. "I prefer preparation." And then she was gone, transported to the surface, leaving Peel to ponder her words as he boarded his observation vessel. The next 5 cycles would be enlightening, one way or another. Epsilon 7 was a moon of stark contrasts. Lush vegetation in some regions, barren wastelands in others, with a thin but breathable atmosphere that carried the perpetual scent of mineral deposits and vegetation decay. Peel's observation vessel hovered silently above Thompson's designated zone, its cloaking technology ensuring she remained unaware of his presence. Through his monitoring screens, Peel watched as Thompson materialized on the surface. She immediately dropped into a defensive crouch, eyes scanning the surroundings, nostrils flaring slightly, using multiple senses to assess her environment. It was a trained response, reminiscent of apex predators across multiple systems. She spent the first hour simply observing, moving only to test the soil composition between her fingers or to examine the flora. Peel noted this in his assessment log. Cadet demonstrates patience and observational skills, prioritizes environmental understanding over immediate shelter construction. When Thompson finally began to move with purpose, her efficiency was notable. She selected a site between two large rock formations, offering protection on two sides while providing visibility across the open terrain before her. Her pack contained standard survival equipment, a multi-purpose tool, water purification tablets, a compact thermal unit for food preparation, a single-person shelter membrane, and emergency rations for 2 cycles, deliberately insufficient for the full assessment. Phase 1 initiated, Peel logged. Shelter site selection shows tactical awareness. Thompson constructed her shelter with methodical precision, anchoring the membrane to create a low-profile structure that blended with the surrounding rocks. She reinforced the corners with gathered stones and camouflaged the entrance with local vegetation. It wasn't the most sophisticated shelter Peel had seen in these assessments, but it was functional and strategically sound. Water was her next priority. The topographical data indicated a small stream approximately half a kilometer from her position. Thompson moved toward it with caution, maintaining awareness of her surroundings in a way that suggested prior training in hostile environments. At the stream, she tested the water with her equipment before collecting and purifying it. Cadet demonstrates proper water procurement protocols, Peel noted. No signs of physical strain from the gravity or atmospheric composition. This was somewhat surprising. Epsilon 7's gravity was 1.2 times that of Earth. Not extreme, but enough that most species would show signs of adaptation stress in the first cycle. Thompson moved as if she barely noticed the difference. By the time Epsilon 7's host planet cast long shadows across the landscape, Thompson had established a functional camp, secured water, and identified several edible plant species that matched those in the database. She had even set up a rudimentary perimeter alarm system using thin vines strung with dried seed pods that would rattle if disturbed. Peel was recording his observations when the first sign of trouble appeared on his monitors. A pack of Dravorn, 6-legged predators with keen olfactory senses and poisonous spines along their dorsal ridges, was approaching Thompson's camp from downwind. They moved with the coordinated precision that made them effective hunters, spreading out to surround potential prey. This was the first real test. Dravorn weren't the most dangerous predators on Epsilon 7, but they were cunning and worked in packs. Most cadets faced them by the second or third cycle, after they'd had time to establish more robust defenses. Peel's appendage hovered over the emergency intervention control. Protocol dictated that he observe unless Thompson's life was in immediate danger. But the approaching Dravorn represented a significant threat to a human with minimal defenses. Thompson was inside her shelter when the first alert from her perimeter system sounded, the subtle rattle of seed pods disturbed by a passing Dravorn. Peel watched as she froze, then slowly reached for her multi-purpose tool. Her movements were deliberate, controlled, betraying no panic. She emerged from her shelter in a low crouch, eyes immediately locating one of the Dravorn as it slunk between rock formations. Instead of retreating into her shelter, which would have been the expected response, Thompson moved quickly to her thermal unit and activated it at maximum output. "Unusual tactic," Peel murmured, recording the behavior. "Thermal signature increase will only attract the Dravorn more quickly." But Thompson wasn't trying to hide her presence. As the thermal unit began to glow with heat, She used her multi-purpose tool to cut sections of dry vegetation, bundling them together. When the Dravorn pack moved closer, now clearly visible in the dim light of dusk, Thompson thrust her bundle of vegetation onto the thermal unit. The dry plant matter ignited immediately, creating a torch that cast flickering light across the campsite. Thompson held it aloft, the flames illuminating her face with an almost ritualistic quality. The lead Dravorn hesitated, its sensory appendages waving in confusion at this unexpected development. Fire, Peel realized, understanding dawning. She's created fire. Fire was rare in the galaxy. Most evolved species came from worlds where oxygen levels were lower than Earth's, making natural combustion uncommon. Fire was known, of course, used in industrial applications across the Alliance. But as a defensive tool in a survival situation, unprecedented in Peel's experience. Thompson advanced toward the lead Dravorn, swinging her improvised torch in a wide arc. The creature retreated, spines flattening against its body, in a clear display of uncertainty. The rest of the pack followed suit, maintaining their distance from the dancing flames. For several tense minutes, Thompson continued this display, gradually expanding her territory and forcing the Dravorn further back. When one of the creatures attempted to circle behind her, she broke off a burning section of her torch and threw it with surprising accuracy, landing it directly in the predator's path. The creature jumped back, emitting a high-pitched sound that Peel's instruments identified as a distress call. Eventually, the pack retreated, disappearing into the darkness beyond the camp's perimeter. Thompson maintained her vigilance for another hour before extinguishing her torch, but not completely. She kept a small fire burning near the entrance to her shelter, feeding it occasionally with gathered vegetation. Peel's report that evening was longer than usual, detailing the unexpected tactics and their effectiveness. Cadet Thompson demonstrated exceptional resource utilization, converting standard equipment to create a fire-based deterrent against Dravorn predators. The tactic suggests both prior knowledge of fire's effect on unfamiliar organisms and the confidence to advance rather than retreat when faced with superior numbers. He hesitated before adding, "This raises questions about traditional assessment metrics for species from high-gravity worlds with unique environmental factors. The Council's interest in human adaptability may be warranted." The second cycle began with Thompson expanding her camp's defenses. She constructed a series of small fire pits around the perimeter, gathering fuel and arranging it for quick ignition if needed. She also reinforced her shelter, adding layers of vegetation and stones to create a more substantial barrier. Adapting based on experience, Peel noted, prioritizing defense improvements over food procurement, suggesting correct threat assessment. When Thompson finally left her camp to explore further, she carried a makeshift spear, her multi-purpose tool attached to a straight branch with strips of fiber from her shelter membrane. It was a sacrifice of comfort for security, a trade-off that Peel found telling. She moved with greater confidence now, having survived the first encounter with local predators. Her path took her toward a dense cluster of vegetation that sensors indicated contained several edible species. As she foraged, Peel noticed something unusual. Thompson was selective, taking only what she needed and dispersing seeds from the fruits she consumed. Cadet displays conservation behavior not required by assessment parameters, he recorded. Possible cultural influence or long-term survival strategy. The unexpected moment came mid-cycle, when Thompson discovered an injured native creature, a small, winged organism that Peel's database identified as a juvenile epsilon flyer, likely separated from its flock. The creature had a damaged wing membrane and was emitting distress pheromones that would eventually attract predators. Standard protocol advised cadets to avoid interference with native wildlife, unless it provided a clear survival advantage. Most species would either ignore the injured creature or consider it a convenient food source. Thompson did neither. She approached the flyer slowly, making soft vocalizations that seemed designed to appear non-threatening. When the creature didn't flee, she carefully examined its damaged wing, then used strips from her emergency medical supplies to create a rudimentary splint. Cadet is expending limited resources on non-essential interaction with native fauna, Peel noted, his tone neutral despite his confusion. Purpose unclear. Thompson created a small shelter for the injured flyer near her camp, providing it with water and small amounts of food appropriate for its species. Throughout the remainder of the cycle, she checked on it periodically, adjusting the splint and continuing those soft vocalizations. Peel found himself increasingly intrigued by these behaviors. They contradicted the efficient survival metrics the Academy typically valued, yet they demonstrated a form of ecological integration that suggested a more nuanced approach to survival. His contemplation was interrupted by an alert from his monitoring systems. Another pack of predators was approaching, Dravorn again, but a different pack, larger than the first. 12 individuals, moving with purpose toward Thompson's camp. Their approach suggested they had detected the injured flyer's continued distress signals. Second predator encounter imminent, Peel logged. Higher threat level than previous engagement. Thompson was foraging when her perimeter alarm activated. She returned quickly, assessing the situation with a glance. The Dravorn were approaching from multiple directions. Having learned from the previous pack's experience, they would not be so easily deterred by fire this time. Peel watched as Thompson's expression changed, not to fear, but to what appeared to be intense calculation. She quickly gathered her remaining supplies and retreated to her shelter. Emerging moments later with a series of small containers fashioned from hollowed vegetation. She had filled them with a mixture of substances that Peel couldn't immediately identify. As the Dravorn closed in, Thompson lit her perimeter fires, creating a ring of light around her position. The predators hesitated, but continued their advance, keeping low to the ground and spreading out to surround her completely. Defensive perimeter insufficient, Peel noted. Cadet likely requires intervention within the next... He stopped mid-sentence as Thompson began to move with sudden purpose. She retrieved the injured flyer, gently placing it inside her shelter, then positioned herself at the center of her camp with her improvised containers arranged around her. The lead Dravorn charged, its powerful legs propelling it toward her with frightening speed. Thompson didn't flee. Instead, she grabbed one of her containers and hurled it directly at the approaching predator. The container burst on impact, releasing a cloud of mixed substances. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The chemicals combined with the air to create a dense, noxious smoke that enveloped the Dravorn. The predator recoiled, emitting high-pitched sounds of distress as it stumbled away from the chemical cloud. Its companions hesitated, sensory appendages waving frantically as they processed this new threat. Thompson used their momentary confusion to throw more of her containers, creating a chemical barrier between herself and the pack. The smoke spread, carrying an acrid scent that Peel's sensors identified as a combination of food preparation compounds and mineral elements from the stream. Nothing lethal, but intensely unpleasant to the sensitive olfactory systems of the Dravorn. "Improvised chemical deterrent," Peel recorded, unable to keep a note of admiration from his voice. "Cadet has weaponized standard survival equipment in a non-obvious application." The Dravorn retreated, their coordinated attack dissolving into disorganized flight as the chemical cloud expanded. Thompson maintained her position, watching until the last predator disappeared from view before allowing herself a moment of visible relief. When the air cleared, she returned to the injured flyer, checking that it had been unharmed by the commotion. The creature had calmed significantly since its rescue, no longer emitting distress signals. It even allowed Thompson to stroke its uninjured wing, a behavior Peel had never observed in wild Epsilon flyers. Symbiotic relationship established, Peel noted. Possible mutual benefit arrangement developing. The third cycle brought new challenges. The weather patterns on Epsilon 7 shifted, bringing heavy precipitation that threatened to flood Thompson's carefully constructed camp. She adapted quickly, creating drainage channels and elevating her shelter using stones and packed vegetation. The injured flyer was healing well under her care. Its distress signals completely ceased. More surprisingly, it had begun to emit a different pheromone pattern, one that Peel's database identified as a territorial marker. The creature was essentially declaring Thompson's camp as protected territory to other native species. Unexpected ecological integration, Peel recorded. Native fauna adopting protective behavior toward off-world entity. Thompson's food stores were running low, forcing her to venture further from camp to forage. She moved with the same calculated caution as before, but now there was a new element to her behavior. The flyer accompanied her, perching on her shoulder or gliding short distances ahead, as if scouting. When native edible plants were nearby, the creature would flutter toward them, inadvertently helping Thompson locate food sources. Mutually beneficial relationship confirmed, Peel noted. Cadet has established functional symbiosis with native fauna, enhancing survival prospects. The real test came during the fourth cycle. Peel's long-range sensors detected movement on the periphery of his monitoring zone, a Vorkath pack. His antennae stiffened in alarm. Vorkath were apex predators on Epsilon 7, eight-limbed hunters with highly developed problem-solving abilities and coordinated pack tactics that rivaled those of sentient species. They rarely ventured into this region, preferring the dense forests to the north. But something had drawn them south. Perhaps it was the unusual activity in Thompson's camp, or maybe they were simply expanding their territory. Whatever the reason, their presence represented a threat level that exceeded the assessment parameters. Peel's appendage moved toward the intervention control again, but he hesitated. Thompson had demonstrated remarkable adaptability so far. The assessment was designed to push cadets to their limits, to evaluate their responses under extreme pressure. Intervening now would deprive her of the opportunity to demonstrate her full capabilities, or confirm the limitations of her species. With reluctance, Peel withdrew his appendage. He would observe a little longer, ready to intervene at the first sign of imminent danger. Thompson was unaware of the approaching threat, focused on reinforcing her shelter against the continuing rain. The flyer, however, sensed the change. It became agitated, emitting a series of sharp clicks that caught Thompson's attention. She froze, then slowly scanned the surroundings, following the direction of the flyer's gaze. At first, there was nothing visible, but Thompson seemed to trust the creature's warning. She quickly gathered her essential supplies, extinguished her fires to reduce detectable signatures, and retreated to a position between the rock formations that formed the backdrop of her camp. Relying on native fauna for early warning, Peel noted. Integration extends to threat detection. The Vorkath emerged from the vegetation with the fluid grace that made them such effective hunters. There were 5 in the pack, each nearly twice Thompson's mass, with multiple eyes that provided comprehensive visual coverage and specialized limbs adapted for both climbing and grasping. They approached the camp methodically, examining the shelter and the remains of Thompson's fires. Their behavior was different from the Dravorn, more deliberate, more intelligent. They were assessing, analyzing, looking for weaknesses. Thompson remained motionless, the flyer perched silently on her shoulder. She was downwind from the Vorkath, reducing the chance of detection by scent. But Peel knew it was only a matter of time before they tracked her to her hiding place. What happened next astonished him. Thompson emerged from hiding voluntarily, stepping into clear view of the Vorkath pack. The predators immediately oriented toward her, their hunting postures intensifying. The flyer launched from her shoulder, circling overhead and emitting a series of warning calls. "Cadet has abandoned concealment," Peel recorded, his tone urgent. Intent unclear, preparing intervention measures. But Thompson wasn't surrendering. She moved with deliberate steps toward the edge of the camp, drawing the Vorkath's attention away from her shelter. In her hand was her last remaining chemical container, larger than the others, presumably containing a more potent mixture. The lead Vorkath advanced, its multiple limbs tensing for a leap. Thompson threw her container, not at the predator, but at the ground between them. It shattered, releasing a cloud of chemicals that reacted violently with the damp soil, creating a thick, expanding fog that obscured visibility. Using the momentary confusion, Thompson sprinted not away from the Vorkath, but parallel to their position, circling toward a section of terrain that Peel's topographical data indicated contained a significant geological feature: a ravine, hidden by vegetation but deep enough to be hazardous. Strategic misdirection, Peel noted, understanding beginning to dawn. Cadet is attempting to lure predators into natural hazard. The Vorkath pursued, their superior speed allowing them to close the distance quickly, despite the chemical fog. Thompson ran with surprising endurance, maintaining a pace that kept her just ahead of the pack while leading them precisely toward the concealed ravine. At the last moment, when capture seemed inevitable, Thompson made a sharp turn, using a rock formation for cover. The lead Vorkath, focused entirely on its prey, failed to detect the change in terrain. It leaped forward and found nothing but open air beneath it. Its momentum carried it over the edge of the ravine, its startled cry alerting the others to the danger. Two more Vorkath, following too closely, tumbled into the ravine as well. The remaining pair halted at the edge, their hunting fervor tempered by the sudden loss of their packmates. Thompson didn't wait for them to regroup. She emerged from her cover and charged directly at them, wielding a burning branch snatched from the remains of her fire. The combination of fire, aggression, and the loss of half their pack was too much for the remaining Vorkath. They retreated, disappearing into the vegetation with uncharacteristic haste. Successful predator neutralization through environmental manipulation, Peel recorded, his professional tone barely masking his astonishment. Cadet demonstrated understanding of terrain, predator psychology, and tactical misdirection. He paused, then added, "Intervention measures canceled. Cadet Thompson has demonstrated sufficient survival capability." What Peel didn't include in his official log was the profound reevaluation occurring in his own thought processes. He had expected to document a human's struggle against a hostile environment, perhaps even their failure. Instead, he was witnessing something that challenged his fundamental understanding of species capability hierarchies. The fifth and final cycle of the assessment was anticlimactic by comparison. Thompson repaired her camp, cared for the now recovering flyer, and maintained her defensive perimeter. No further predators approached, whether due to the territorial markers of the flyer or the reputation Thompson had established among the local fauna. When the extraction signal finally came, Thompson seemed almost reluctant to leave. She carefully dismantled her camp, removing all non-native materials and restoring the site as closely as possible to its original state. The flyer, now able to glide effectively, if not yet fly properly, followed her to the extraction point. There, she faced a decision that wasn't covered in the assessment protocols. The flyer couldn't accompany her back to the academy. Regulations prohibited the removal of non-cataloged native species from their habitats. Yet, leaving it behind, still not fully healed, would likely result in its death. Peel watched as Thompson knelt beside the creature, speaking to it in soft tones that his sensors couldn't quite detect. She stroked its healing wing one last time, then stepped back, activating her extraction beacon. As the transport beam began to materialize around her, the flyer suddenly launched itself upward, its wings beating with newfound strength. It circled once above Thompson, then glided away toward a distant grove of trees, where Peel's sensors detected the presence of a flyer flock. Native fauna released to rejoin its species, Peel noted. Full recovery achieved under Cadet's care. In that moment, as Thompson's form began to dissolve in the transport beam, she looked directly upward, directly at Peel's observation vessel, despite its cloaking technology. Her expression held no resentment for the constant observation, only a quiet confidence. She knew he had been watching. She had known all along. And then she was gone, leaving Peel with a data cache full of observations and a profound sense that something significant had changed in his understanding of humans. The debriefing session back at the Academy was unlike any Peel had conducted before. Commander Vox and a representative from the Council were present, their attention focused intently on his report. "Instructor Peel," Vox began, "your preliminary findings indicate that Cadet Thompson not only survived the full assessment period, but demonstrated exceptional adaptability and resource utilization. Is that an accurate summary?" "It is, Commander," Peel replied, his antennae held in a formal position. "However, it fails to capture the extent of her achievements. Cadet Thompson didn't merely survive. She adapted the environment to her advantage, established symbiotic relationships with native fauna, and neutralized apex predators through tactical innovation." The Council representative, a Marazian elder whose translucent form seemed to pulse with thought, spoke next. "These findings contradict our established understanding of human capabilities. Their physical limitations are well documented. How do you account for this discrepancy?" Peel considered his response carefully. "Elder, I believe our metrics may be insufficient when evaluating species from extreme environments. Humans evolved on a world that would be lethal to most alliance species. Their adaptability isn't despite their physical limitations. It's because of them." "Explain," the elder prompted. "Lacking natural defenses, they developed problem-solving and tool utilization to an extraordinary degree," Peel continued. "Thompson converted standard survival equipment into chemical weapons. She used fire, as a defensive mechanism. She anticipated predator behavior and manipulated it to her advantage. These aren't physical adaptations, they're cognitive ones." "And the relationship with the native creature?" Vox asked. "Unprecedented in assessment history," Peel admitted. "She expended limited resources to save a non-essential organism. Yet that decision ultimately enhanced her survival prospects. The creature provided early warning of predator approach and helped locate food sources." The elder's form rippled, a sign of deep thought in Marazian physiology. "What are your recommendations, Instructor?" Peel's inner eyelid flickered once, then steadied. "I recommend Cadet Thompson for advanced tactical training. Her approach to survival challenges demonstrates an innovative perspective that could benefit the Academy curriculum. Furthermore, I suggest a re-evaluation of our assessment metrics for species from high-gravity worlds, particularly those with predominantly cognitive, rather than physical adaptations." "And regarding the Council's evaluation of human suitability for Alliance membership," the elder pressed. "That is beyond my authority to recommend," Peel replied diplomatically. "However, I will note that if Cadet Thompson is representative of human adaptability, they may offer perspectives and approaches that our current membership lacks. Diversity of problem-solving methodologies strengthens the Alliance as a whole." The debriefing continued for several more hours, with Peel providing detailed accounts of Thompson's tactics and innovations. By the end, even the skeptical Council representative seemed thoughtful rather than dismissive. "We will take your observations under advisement, Instructor Peel," the elder said finally. "The Council will review the complete assessment data before making any determinations regarding human integration into Alliance structures." As the session concluded, Commander Vox held Peel back with a gentle touch of her tentacle. "Off the record, Zorak," she said, switching to a more personal tone. "Were you impressed?" Peel's antennae relaxed slightly. "Truthfully, Vox, I was astonished. Everything I thought I knew about humans, about the hierarchy of species capabilities, has been called into question. Thompson didn't just survive, she thrived in conditions that should have been beyond her capacity. And the psychological impact?" Vox pressed. Humans are known for their emotional volatility. That's what makes it more remarkable, Peel admitted. She showed no signs of psychological distress. If anything, she seemed engaged, as though the challenge itself was stimulating rather than threatening. Vox's tentacles formed a pattern that indicated amused approval. Perhaps that's the true adaptation of Deathworlders. Not just surviving adversity, but finding purpose in it. When Peel finally returned to his quarters, he found a message waiting from Graz. Heard your human cadet passed the assessment. Still just problematic. Or have you revised your opinion? Peel sent a simple reply. Revision in progress. Extensive revision. The following cycle, as Peel walked through the academy corridors toward his next instruction session, he encountered Thompson. She was in conversation with a group of cadets from various species, gesturing animatedly as she explained something about Earth's diverse ecosystems. Their eyes met briefly across the corridor. Thompson paused in her explanation, offering a respectful nod, not the formal salute required by protocol, but something more meaningful. Acknowledgement between equals who had shared an experience beyond words. Peel found himself returning the gesture, lowering his head slightly in a sign of respect that, in his species, was reserved for those who had demonstrated exceptional merit. As he continued on his way, Peel heard one of the cadets ask Thompson about her survival assessment. Her response drifted down the corridor after him. It wasn't about being stronger or faster than the predators, she was saying. It was about understanding that survival isn't just about the individual. It's about finding your place in the ecosystem, even temporarily. Everything is connected, and if you can figure out those connections, you can find your way through. Peel's antennae twitched in agreement. The human had understood something fundamental, something that perhaps only a species from a death world could truly grasp. Survival wasn't just endurance. It was integration, adaptation, innovation. As he entered his classroom and faced a new group of cadets, Peel made a decision. Today's lesson would deviate from the standard curriculum. Today, they would discuss the unexpected strengths that could emerge from evolutionary pressure and how limitations could become advantages in the right circumstances. Today, they would learn about Deathworlders. And perhaps in time, the Alliance would learn as well. The galaxy was vast and often hostile, filled with challenges that required more than physical strength or technological superiority to overcome. Sometimes, what was needed was the perspective of a species that had evolved on a world where every day was a survival assessment. A species that didn't just endure adversity, but transformed it into opportunity. A species like humans. Like Cadet Mara Thompson, who was just a student from a death world until the predator pack turned and fled.